Okay. All right. Welcome back to the Word and Journey podcast. Stories that shape us and make us think, and that other people recommend and think we should think highly about, and then sometime we read, which is exactly what happened for me and The Way of Kings. We're concluding The Way of Kings. I went and finished the book. I had meant to somewhere in there talk a little bit more about it in smaller increments, but then the holidays happened and there was sickness and ice storms and festivities, and I just didn't have time to get to the microphone. So I finished the book and now I'm going to tell you about it. So there will be minor spoilers. I will try not to spoil too much of the plot, but this is the type of show where, as I'm talking about a story, there are some spoilers. So if you haven't read The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, if I'm not actually the last person to have discovered this particular classic, then go read 1,000 pages, listen to 45 hours of story, and then come listen to this episode. Otherwise, if you have taken it in and appreciate it, feel free to hang out right here with us while we're talking. And by us, I mean me and whoever happens to be there, and I hope someone is there. Anyway, so I'd had The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson recommended to me for many years, book one of the Stormlight Archive, and finally I got around to it. And so now I'm done, and I'm putting to this book the question that I am putting to all stories lately: is this good? Uh, is this great? Always looking for what sets a book apart, what sets a story apart from all of the stories that get forgotten, and makes it something kind of extraordinary. What makes a book a classic? Does the Stormlight Archive do the Stormlight Archives? Does The Way of Kings have potential to become a classic? Maybe. It's kind of one of those things where really time is the final arbiter and time will tell. But we can definitely look at some things like the relative skill level of it, the complexity of it, the depth of theme handled, the way that the author takes standard forms of the art form and plays with them, puts in the accidentals, etc., and all of that. So in my final estimation of book one, and I suppose if it's any indication, I'm planning to take in book two. So it took me at least that much. I'm being a little mean. I really liked it. I really did enjoy the story, and I found it worth the time to do an audiobook. It would be hard for me to commit to 1,000 pages reading out of a book. That's just where my life has gone. But yeah, it was worth the audiobook. Altogether, so what are some of the strengths? So world building. It's definitely a world building book. It's a high fantasy story. I thought the world building was really good. It was really complex. There were lots of different cultures. There was a really multi-layered, multi-millennia history. There were a couple of different religions, a lot of different politics, multiple classes on the SES spectrum represented. There were male characters, female characters. So that's getting into the character discussion. But there was a reality to the world, a reality and a complexity, and multiple components all colliding with each other, which was just really interesting. And it was really interesting to explore the world and get to see, here's another person from yet another corner of the world, and here's another story from yet another era of the history. And it just kind of went on and on and on. There's just like always something more. So yeah, world building, well done. Plot, very interesting. There were there were some twists. I liked that. I always like flashbacks. So in this one, only one character. Trying to think now. Only one character, the Kaladin character, seemed to have true flashbacks. Another character, the Dalinar character, was having visions that were set in the past, and so he's going back and forth between timelines. Also, I tend to like that feature, and I like getting multiple eras of a person's story all thrown in. So I thought that was well done, but not overdone. So that was good. There was definitely a sense of the story is set in one particular time, and we're stepping out of it here and there. let's see, what else did I like about the plot? Uh, a lot of it followed kind of a predictable arc, and here's where it gets into the characters very much. It was very much a story of, here's Kaladin, the lowly bridgeman slave who trains his men and gathers his men, and they become better and better soldiers, and they kind of ascend until at the end they have this really great opportunity. You have a kingly character who's kind of like at the top of his game, who kind of wavers, and he seems like he might be headed on a downward spiral. And then again has some fun twists and opportunities toward the end. You have the Shalon character, the who she's out on a heist quest, and you kind of watch her progress through that as she seems like she's succeeding, and then it seems like she's failing, and then there's some twists that allow for again more opportunities. So yeah, nothing terribly like they're plot arcs that we've seen before, but they're plot arcs that we love, and they're really compelling. And there's something about the hero striving and encountering obstacles and continuing to strive and in continuing to overcome that we really love. It really resonates with something deep in us. So I don't have any complaints there. They were really good arcs, and which getting us into the characters. Uh, for me, that tends to be why I read a story is I am interested in the characters and I'm interested in their lives and their personalities. And so the main character, Kaladin, he's again the lowly bridgeman. He's a slave. He has his trauma background. He has his inner work, his inner demons, his inner struggles with despair and suicide and anger. And at the same time, I appreciated how at the same time he's doing these outward struggles, he's struggling against his own camp leaders, he's struggling against his high prince, against the Parshendi, against the forces of nature. He's also very much struggling against his own self. He's struggling against his own despair, his own anger, his own cynicism, his own mistrust of the light eyes. And on both counts, he makes some strides. Um, the Shalon character, uh, also really really interesting character, as she sets out on this heist to go steal this precious object from this really powerful woman, and her plot is to get this woman to take her on as a student, as a ward. And in the process she comes to absolutely love learning, absolutely respect the woman. And then and then the conflict becomes, oh my goodness, I'm having to betray and violate this person that I really respect, and I'm having to hopefully to leave this work that I really love. What am I going to do? And so there's this conundrum, and watching her wrestle through what she wants for herself versus for her people, what she wants now versus what she wants most. Really compelling. Again, it's a true to life sort of struggle. So seeing it depicted in a really fun, flashy, creative way is kind of fun. And watching the Dalinar character, the kingly character, who's grappling with, like, he has all of this power. What is he going to do with it? He's got people watching him. What's he going to do with that? He has a sense of, I need to go against my culture for the good of my culture, and I'm going to have to look the fool because I carry some wisdom. And what am I going to do with that? And he gets a lot of flack for following the codes and striving to make other or bring others into following the codes. And it's an interesting, very interesting sort of struggle for him. But to see him persist in that and to overcome a lot of things there, and again, it's really interesting. And in there you have the spread of an older character and two younger characters, male characters, female characters, characters with lots of power, characters with very little power, and they're all kind of interesting. So again, I'd say character building pretty well done. The other component to consider would be wordsmithing, and it's well written and really beautifully written. Not necessarily written like a Cormac McCarthy novel. It's not. I imagine like each page, the visual aspect of the page is not necessarily the artistic part. And he's not like one of those authors like Cormac McCarthy or like Paul Kingsnorth that can get away without using punctuation. He's not quite going for that effect. His language is really clear. really direct, really concise, really easy to follow. So, which for this genre works really well. So, in thinking about, is a story a good story? Is it a great story? We'd consider, well, what's the story teaching us through the characters, through the worldview, through what's done or not done. So I compiled some brief notes of some themes that seem to come out that would be worth noting if you're debating on whether or not to take the plunge into the story or not. Here's some things that you'll find that get thrown at you. So definitely this idea that heroes can rise from lowly places. Again, Exhibit A, Kaladin, and his rise from he's a slave, he's mistreated and ignored and nameless and about to die, all the way to where now he's interacting with the highest level of his social strata, and being noticed and being recognized for that in really good ways. Uh, uh, I mean that's the hero's arc, and it's just really wonderful where it shows up. Um, there's a strong theme of honor. Honor matters. Doing what's right because it is right matters. Doing what's right apart from the hope of gain. Uh, is a really important thing, and this is something you see in the Dalinar character, Dalinar and his son Adolin, as they're grappling with, do we follow the codes, the ancient codes? And you see it with Kaladin as he's deliberating on, do I try to care for these wounded who nobody cares about and are probably going to die anyway? Do we care for each other? Do we? Because the way the world is set up, it's very easy to not care and to only care about yourself and to only care about your distractions and your pleasures. And it's really easy to be corrupt in this world. But you get these characters who get a sense of, no, there's a right, even though there's maybe this relativistic atmosphere and this culture of we don't really care. There's no need to care, especially for those in power. There's a sense of like, we're in power. What should we care about those other lowly people? There's a sense that arises of, but the honorable thing, the virtuous thing would be to care. Or on the other end, these people who are at the very bottom of the social structure, who have no hope, no prospects, no opportunities, no one sticking up for them. In a sense, no reason to care even about what their bridge mates' names are. Uh, but yet there is a right. There is a noble way. There's a virtuous way. There's a way that is good and transformative. And you see characters who begin to follow this right way, this noble way, uh, and not really with a sense of there's something I'm going to gain. There kind of is for Kaladin. There's always this thought of, maybe I can save my men, maybe we can escape. And for Dalinar, there's this far off hope of, I could unite the higher princes and and make the world better. And for Shallan, there's this thought of, well, there's this dual thought of, I could save my family and do something there, or I could become this great scholar and really love life that way. Um, so there is a sense of some gain, but it often tends to be very far off. There's not immediate gain. And yet you see characters who are really valuing the pursuit of what is good and right and true and noble. So there's a sense this story is teaching that nobility matters and that virtue matters and is worthwhile because of what it does to you. One other lesson that comes up, it's the power of shared meals, literally sharing food, which gets into this conversation around the power of ritual and shared participation in a ritual by a people. Where this comes out the most is with Kaladin, and he's with his bridge crew and all of the bridge crews, and they're in the camps, and he's having to his first hurdle is inspiring his men to try at all, to care about each other's names and to believe in themselves. And one of the methods he uses is he feeds them and he eats with them and he provides a way for people to come together and to eat. And and you see that thread throughout all the way up until the end of part of how his men unite and participate with each other and become team and family with each other is through this idea of sharing a meal. And there's a lot of significance to a shared meal. It's a big thing in a lot of cultures, hospitality cultures, in a lot of ancient rituals. It was a major part of worship is you commune with your divinity through a shared meal. And so so there's something really powerful about that. Is the power in the food or is the power in the ritual? They're both there, but it's worth noting in the story when we think about community, when we think about relationships, when we think about overcoming isolation. How do we do it? Caring about people, showing care, picking people up off the battlefield, bandaging their wounds, feeding people or eating with people. It's a fairly accessible way of beginning to share life with people. So it's a good thing. Um, Enslaving a whole people group is a bad idea. It just is. And so there's a twist in the story that I won't say a lot here in case of spoilers. But just so you know, if you ever thought that you wanted to like enslave a whole people group, don't. It's just a bad idea. It'll result in trouble of various sorts. Um, Another thing we see presented in this story, you see corruption happens on every strata of the SES spectrum, but also noble heroism. So yeah, you got some of the high princes who are really courageous and noble and virtuous, and others that are scumbags. And same thing on the bottom. You see people who people who care about each other, who try to do right, and people who will stab you in the back. Um, so that's just a thing. Um, good and evil isn't divided by social class. It's not one class is good, the other class is bad. There's good and evil across the strata. There's some interesting depictions around gender. So if you watch your male characters in the story, you watch them exploring things like honor and virtue and self-sacrifice. If you watch your female characters, you watch them exploring moral ambiguity and subversion, kind of an end justifies the means approach. A lot more intrigue. uh, then that's a little bit of the subtext. More overtly, men are taught to fight, to use their hands, maybe to be surgeons. Women are taught to read and write. Men are not. So there's some really interesting divides there. It's kind of a little bit more complementarian than hierarchical, I think. Although you don't see any women high princes. So kind of a cross between hierarchical and complementarian view of gender. They do really different things. They have really different roles, and the way that these characters are presented, they're just exploring whole different types of issues, which is interesting. What is Brandon Sanderson saying about men and women? Yeah, can't say for certain, but they're definitely pursuing really different things. Um, so there's an interesting thread around religion and spirituality. So there's the very notable presence of the supernatural in the story. Um, the Lost Radiance, the Voidbringers, the Almighty, the Stormfather. Um, so there's these supernatural things that seem to happen. It seems like the Spren in general are kind of this supernatural sort of phenomenon. So that's all over the place. And you see definitely the political presence of religion in the Ardents, and the Ardents have their agendas to convert people and to steal, Princess Yasna's soulcaster, and they're very explicitly forbidden from certain forms of governing. So religion as a political force is definitely present. Uh, and it's interesting in that no one really has an active spiritual practice in this story. And there's not really a sense of inner transformation happening through a spiritual practice. There's not a sense there's a sense of they recognize there's a presence of the Almighty, but no one seems to have a really personal relationship or even an interactive relationship with the Almighty. Um, he seems to be just this very distant figure that has a lot of power. A lot of things can be attributed to him, but no one really interacts or no one really has a relationship there. There's not a sense of we're participating in anything with him. like in some other religions. There can be, certainly this shows up in Orthodox Christianity. There's a sense of us being co-creators, or in a sense of we go through life, the process of theosis, to even in the afterlife and eternity participate in the work of the angels. And so there's a sense of a more dynamic relationship, or a relationship that might start out kind of distant but become closer as we become more like God through various practices. In this story, there's not any sense of people joining the Almighty in his nature. There's kind of a sense of they might participate in his work as like servants, but still with a little bit of distance. So it's interesting. And it's an interesting presentation of spirituality and religion as these, there's these supernatural events, there's these political forces, there's a lot of history, not necessarily a spiritual practice, not necessarily an inwardly focused spiritual practice. So it's interesting. Um, and the exception would be the exception would be the Dalinar character, because you do see him going through a lot of transformation kind of related to the supernatural, but he's also the one having visions. He's also the one reading The Way of Kings, the book. And so for him, a lot of his transformation comes through entertaining the ideas that he's read in this book, which kind of mirrors how the Protestant Christians will relate to the Bible, to the Holy Scriptures. There's a sense where they seek a transformation through exposure to the text, and it's definitely a powerful, compelling text. That's their connection. It's not always with actually God or divinity. It's, well, we think this text itself has power, and so we're going to expect that time spent in the text will result in changes for us. So again, uh, as a storytelling device, as a world building plot, it's wonderful. It completely works. But in terms of like what is this story teaching us about spirituality, religion? What should we expect there? There is kind of this utilitarian, like kind of distant from the divine flavor to how religion is presented. So again, it's not like a real life religion or anything. And if you actually wanted to learn about religion, spirituality, you should go to church or something. But there's an interesting presentation there. Very interesting. Last theme that kind of comes out is talking about the value of life. There's some really interesting scenes where Dalinar, again, he's this high prince. He's nicknamed the Blackthorn because of his prowess in battle. He's really good at killing. You have the Kaladin character who, he's just a lowly spearman, but a really talented one. And turns out he's also really good at killing. And with both of them, you start to watch them step back from what they're good at and really reflect on what they're doing. And as you get to watch them watch their killings, you get to watch how they look at it. And they really get to take in, oh, the horrors of war, and oh my goodness, I'm ending these lives. And okay, sure, there's this thrill of battle, but I'm killing people. That's awful. And you get to see them really wrestle with, well, what am I doing in doing this really monstrous thing? So there's some commentary on war and violence there, no doubt. There's some commentary on the value of human life. At the end too, there's this really, this is a twist I won't say much in detail, but there at the end, there's this really big statement on the value of human life as being very priceless. So which is an interesting thing to bring out in a story that centers on a war. There's lots of people are dying. We're trying to like commit genocide on this other race, to recognize, but life is precious, and life is priceless, and life is worthy of guarding and healing, and on all strata. And this is something that you see a lot in the Kaladin character. Something that's really heroic, very noble, is the way he is always trying to save people, always trying to save even the wounded, even his competitors wounded, even not having any supplies and not really having any prospect of being able to sustain the saving. He plunges into it anyway, again, because it's a right thing to do, because it changes him to do what is right, and it makes him better to do what is right. So doing what's right, what's virtuous, what's noble, because of how it is good for the person to do it is definitely a theme. Uh, so yeah, there's a lot there that the story teaches or presents, and so those are some of the high points that the story will promote. Should you read it? Uh, I guess that's kind of the question that I'm thinking through as I'm reading stories and now talking about them is, should another person read the story? Does it benefit the person? Does it benefit the world for the story to be around and for us to take it in? So uh, I'm not going to say definitively because I don't know everybody's life. For me, I like the story. I feel like I benefited. I feel like I learned something from it. There's this little moment in there where again the High Prince Dalinar, he's reflecting on how he's tried to invite the other High Princes into following the codes, into this more noble lifestyle, and realizing it just hasn't worked. He can't do it, and then he comes to compare it to raising a child, and there's this little line of like, and you require rightness of a child until he or she is able to require it of themselves. And actually, I was like, oh, well, because I have kids too, and I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yes, I cross their will not to be mean or tyrannical, but because there is a right way to go. There's a right way to do things, a right, a noble, a healthy way. And yeah, they're kids. They don't know better. They can't decide for themselves to do what is good. So it is my task to require of them to do good and to shape them and to direct them in that until they're able to do so on their own. Um, little nuggets like that. I pulled out of a story like this. So I would say overall, I benefited from it. It was definitely entertaining, definitely a good diversion. There's some cool themes to make me think about. Uh, the things that's feeding into my subconscious, I think, are of a more noble, heroic sort. So yeah, I'd say it's pretty good, pretty clean. Not necessarily, probably not for little kids, but I'd say yes, it's a book worth recommending. And like I said, I'm definitely gonna, take in book two at some point. So in any case, that's my reflection on book one of the Stormlight Archive, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I liked it. I'll keep reading. It was good. So thank you to all of the people who recommended it to me. Thank you for your recommendations. I'm glad I took you up on it. Send me more recommendations. That'll be good. uh, so thank you again for being with me this evening. If you like this sort of thing, talking about books and stories and how they affect our lives, please follow the podcast, The Word and Journey. It's on Apple and Spotify and some places like that. Also on YouTube. Please visit patreon.com/Moses Bernabe. Drop me a few dollars and help me to stay on the air. Uh, and like and review the show, share it around, and keep listening, keep reading with me. Very much appreciate you. And we will be back soon to talk about more stories.